This is going to be a quick behind the scenes look at ICL and how no touch invoice gets processed through to their SAP system. So just to remind you, the gateway and converter at the top there, we're not going to focus too much on those. That's where the invoices come in multiple ways. But what we're really going to be focusing in on is the processor, which helps to validate things before they get sent to SAP. And these are using a toolbox of validation, compliance, governance, resolution workflows, and just lots of bots that are deployed in the process. And then we're going to look downstream a little bit into the gateway that feeds into SAP, show how the item that we're looking at actually came in to SAP and was registered and status was given back to the supplier. Okay, so first, processing. Let's look in on the portal view of Nipendo from the ICL standpoint. So this is the buyer's viewpoint if they want to see what's going on before they get the invoice into SAP. And again, we're talking about a no-touch invoice. So ideally, they're not looking at this unless there's problems. But here's a history of this particular invoice, when it was sent by the supplier, when it was put on hold, when it was released from hold, and then finally when it was added into SAP. We're joining something after it happened so that we could show you the whole thing, but you could see the different stages that it went through with this history tab. But the important part is to get into the validations. So clicking on the validations tab, you see that there's this long list of history of validations as well. And the validations are what the bots are doing in the processing. They're looking at things like invoice signature validation. In Israel, you require a signature on the invoice to make it official. You need the invoice type to route to a certain process based on the fact that it might be a pro forma invoice. Then you need to do a data integrity check, making sure that all the things that are expected in the fields that have been extracted from the data are correct. You need to look if there's a purchase order that is associated with this particular invoice and route accordingly. You need to validate that the invoice lines match the order lines if it does have a purchase order. In this case, it does. If the order has data that's complete in this as well, and then whether it matches the order type. So these are all basically, if it has a identified PO, the steps you take after that. That's what we've just been following through. Then there's PO data, making sure that the PO data matches according to what's in the vendor master, for example, DUNS numbers and so on. And then country specific, currency specific information, and whether there needs to be routing based on the PO currency. There's also exchange rate calculations that are performed by the bots as necessary. Now, finally, we get into the invoice details based on the image itself. We route for an OCR check to make sure that the information that was given on the invoice matches our records. Looking at the shipping notification number and the goods receipt for the PO to see if there's something there. There is a goods receipt, but we'll see a little bit later on that there's a bit of a problem, that the order line is not matching the receipt number. The delivery notes is not matching. So that's that hold there that's in orange. And then that then gets cleared up 6 hours later, it seems, given the timestamp there. It gets cleared up with a good shipping notice, which then allows us to release the order and proceed with the final checks before we send in the invoice for voucher. Goods receipt requires a quantity check, making sure the line quantity on the receipt is the same as the line on the invoice, and verifications there, as well as amount check. Where possible, you could look for invoice and receipt amounts, and you see that there's a 1 penny difference there, and since that's under a tolerance limit that the bot controls, you got passed on that one as well. That can be configured. And we finally reach the final stage where this can be sent into SAP and vouchered accordingly. Now, for the SAP part, we're going to talk to Rachel, who uses it in ICL. Rachel, what are we looking at?
Here, this screen is the screen of the monitor of the interface between Nipendo and SAP. It shows the messages that are coming and going between us and Nipendo.
And so that first line shows the data arriving. Is that all that comes from Nipendo?
And it arrives also with the image. The data of the invoice are coming and the image itself.
What does SAP do when it gets the invoice from Nintendo?
This vendor is defined as automatically posted vendor. So the invoice went through regular SAP validations and it was successfully posted.
Nice. So no touch by the AP team on the SAP side. What are those other two lines on the documents list?
Immediately, a status is sent to Nipendo. One status is that the invoice is arrived, and the other status is the invoice is approved.
Well, this was great, Rachel. Thank you very much for showing us that.
You're welcome.